Welcome to Love Your Adventure. I am Jennifer Olson, and today, this month, really, we have been talking about Virgin Voyages and some of the differences between Virgin Voyages and other cruise lines, because let's face it, it is a very different experience from the moment that you book to the moment that you step off the ship. It is just different than other cruise lines, which was by design. So in our last video, we discussed some of the differences on the cruise line. And today I wanted to go a little bit deeper into a couple of other features that are different that I did not talk about on our last video. So if you haven't already, please watch the other video. It definitely goes into a lot more detail with some of the differences. And as always, please like and subscribe so that you can be notified with any of our videos that we put out. Without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about some of the differences with Virgin Voyages compared to the other major cruise lines. Let's talk about drink packages. So on other cruise lines, most of them offer like an all-inclusive package where you can get as many drinks as you want, and it is all one price that you pay up front, and then you don't have to think about it while you're on board. You can order what you want and not worry about it. Now, sometimes, depending on the cruise line, if it's a premium alcohol or a bottle of wine or a certain type of wine that is a little more spendy, then there is a price on top of that. Now, that's a typical cruise line. With Virgin Voyages, none of that happens. There's no packages at all. There's no non-alcoholic packages, no drink packages, nothing. Everything is under what's called bar tab. And bar tab is what you would think it is. It is an amount that you can prepay, and it's usually by it's either $100, $200, or $300. And there's different points throughout the month and the year that Virgin Voyages runs different promotions that gives you added bar tab when you prepay for it. So I believe right now you buy $100, I think you get an extra $10 maybe. $200 you get an added $25, and then if you get $300 and you get an added $50 onto your bar tab. Now, that is typically sold per person, unlike everything else on Virgin Voyages where it's for the cabin. Even their cabin prices, it's not sold per person, it's typically sold per cabin. So it is a little bit different in that regard. In order, like if you are going with your friends, that's great. And you both have your separate bar tabs. You don't have to worry about who's drinking more, who's spending more, or anything like that. Like your accounts are totally separate. However, if you're going with your spouse, it is different than other cruise lines, because on other cruise lines, the cabin charges are the cabin charges. So you can see each other's charges and you can figure out how you want to split it, or just have one credit card on file and you take care of it all. In order to do that on Virgin Voyages, you basically have to set it up where somebody else is covering your bill. And it's not just for alcohol, it's for anything. And to me, the downfall is that when we set it up, it ended up that my husband was covering my bill. So I could not see the charges throughout the entire voyage. He could see them, but I couldn't, which I've never experienced in any other cruise line. We both could always see all of the charges. It just kind of depends on how you feel about that. Like if you're traveling with a friend, okay, great. Like it doesn't really matter. If you're traveling with a spouse, it's a little weird, in my opinion. However, the bar tab itself, the drinks are pretty typical pricing for, if anything, it might be a little bit less than what you would pay at some bars, restaurants, or other cruise lines, but the pricing is pretty comparable to a typical cruise line, in my opinion. And like we are not big drinkers, so we don't typically buy a drink package on other cruise lines. But I will say that one of the things on Virgin Voyages is like everything else is set up so that you don't have to worry about it before you get on board. However, I found myself, and usually I do get a drink package, but not usually the alcohol package because I don't drink enough alcohol to make that worthwhile. But I found with Virgin Voyages, every time I went to go order any kind of drink outside of water, it was in the back of my head, like trying to tally up, like how much have I spent and whatnot. And part of that is because I couldn't see the actual financial portion. But I think even if I could, I would still be, it would be in the back of my mind as something that I'm just tallying up so that I'm not getting to the last day of the cruise and having a couple $100 bill type of ordeal. I just don't particularly like surprises like that, and I like to pre-plan. So, I mean, that's one of the benefits of cruising, right? Is that there's no surprise at the end of your cruise as far as an added expense. Like you've already accounted for everything at the beginning. So that's one of the large differences. The other difference I would say would be boarding. So with every other cruise line, if you pick a boarding time, you go, you get in a line, and then like you start boarding. If you're in a suite, you get priority boarding and you just go through a different line. And some of that is the same with Virgin Voyages and some of it isn't. One of the biggest changes is the time that you board. Everything, all of the entertainment, well, not all of it, but a lot of the entertainment and even especially boarding, it's much later than other cruise lines. So most cruise lines, and you have to get off the ship at the same time as other cruise lines. Like everybody has to be off by, I believe, 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. Which so that's the exact same as other cruise lines. With Virgin Voyages, though the boarding times actually start later. So when we went, our boarding time was 3:45, and typically like that's like after like the final boarding time on other cruise lines. So to my surprise, they actually had boarding times all the way through, I believe 4:45 was the last boarding time. Now, with them, the difference is that if you actually arrive after your boarding time, you don't have to get in line. You could just walk right in. And so now I will also say that we were there early, and they actually have, when they start boarding, they have 8 different lines. They line people up for every 15 minutes, which is pretty common for any major cruise line. When you get there, they have some sort of line. Either everybody gets in one line or they break it up into your boarding times. So that part was the same. Our boarding time wasn't even listed though, so we had to stand off to the side. They had plenty of staff out there to check so that people were not joining earlier boarding times. But with that being said, they were boarding each of those boarding times well in advance of the actual boarding time. So, like I said, our boarding time was 3:45, and we went through the entire security and onboarding experience, and we were on the ship by I think 2:45. I think we were actually on board a whole hour early, or pretty close to it. Now I can't guarantee that for everybody, but they do try to get people that are waiting on board as quickly as possible. And so the other difference, okay, so they do have a separate section for the suite guests. And as soon as they start boarding, they can board at any time. They don't need to adhere to their boarding time, which is the same, I know, for Royal Caribbean. I believe it's the same for most other cruise lines, where if you're in a suite, then you get priority boarding. So that's pretty much the boarding experience. The other difference is there is definitely no hoopla. It's not like Disney where you get announced when you walk in the door. There may or may not be um, some of the staff or the entertainment team there to greet you and so forth. But when you get on board, you are totally free to go and do whatever you want to do, including go to your cabin, which is very different. Most other cruise lines, you have to wait until a certain time in order to have access to your cabin. And then with that being said, also, our luggage was not there immediately. However, the luggage gets there way quicker than on other cruise lines. Some other cruise lines, your luggage, they guarantee it by like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So they encourage you to, bring a bathing suit and other things on board, which I would still recommend doing for this because, like I said, your stuff is not in your room immediately. But I want to say it was in our room within an hour or so of boarding. Like it was not very, very different at all. The other difference are the different kind of controls that are in the room. To our surprise, the TV remote does not really control the TV. You do have an iPad in your room and it controls the TV, as well as the lighting. There's different kind of mood lighting that you can kind of play with. The curtains are also electric, in which case you can either have them open or closed. There's at least the blackout blinds. They're either open or closed. There's really no halfway or just have it open a little bit, because once you start moving it, then it catches and it opens all the way. So that was a little bit different. And then so instead of the magnet that you put out on the door, there's actually a little switch in the closet right inside the door where you can put do not disturb, which on the outside of the room by your door number or by your cabin number, if there's a little light underneath the cabin number. And if you don't have anything selected in your cabin, it will be, I believe, just black, like there's no lights. If you put do not disturb, it turns red. And then if you put needs service, then it turns blue. And so I thought that was really nice where, you don't have to remember well, you still have to remember to hit the button, but you don't have to worry about like putting the magnet out and things like that, because let's face it, usually when you're leaving, you might have things on your hand or whatever. It's really easy to just hit the button and then leave. And then the other difference, which isn't different than some cruise lines, is that you don't get a CPAS card. You get a bracelet, and it has a little chip in it, and it is what you use for everything. You use it for any kind of pay for drink, which soda and water and like drip coffee are included, but everything else you would pay for. Any kind of fresh pressed juice or foo coffees, as I call them, any kind of alcohol or mocktail or anything like that, you would pay for. So then they just scan your badge and then it ends up on your account. Well, that's also what you use to open up your room keys or your room. So you actually have to scan it when you get up to your cabin. And so that was different than some cruise lines. I do know that Princess uses the medallions, which actually I think are maybe even a step above what this is, because my understanding is you no longer even have to put it up against the sensor, that when you get up to your cabin, it actually automatically unlocks your door because it senses it close. So that's more like almost like an Apple AirTag. in my opinion. So I would like that better. I do like the risk versus having to pull out a routine and doing that. But hopefully maybe in the future it will get to a little bit more advanced technology. But those are really the biggest differences that they didn't cover. Please excuse my dogs in the background. But those are really the biggest differences that I experienced between Virgin Voyages um, and other cruise lines. Mainly the boarding process as well as the bar tab. And overall, it's not a deal breaker by any means. It's just a different experience, and it's having to plan to keep in mind the budget when you're on board. So without further ado, if you do have any questions about sailing on Virgin Voyages, or if you also would like to give it a try, if you are looking for an adults only cruise, it really was without a doubt a really nice experience. And we both enjoyed it. Then please feel free to give me a call or contact me. My contact information is in the details box here. And I hope to see you on our next video. And as always, keep remembering to love your adventure. Take care.